The request itself, now viewed through the harsh lens of regret, seemed innocuous enough, almost disarmingly sweet. My wife, Sarah, with that familiar furrow between her brows that signaled deep concern, wanted me to be closer to her sister, Emily. "She's lonely," Sarah had explained, her voice laced with a tenderness that always melted my heart. "She needs someone she can talk to, someone who understands her, someone besides me." The subtle caveat should have registered, the barely perceptible tremor in her voice, the way she avoided my gaze. I should have seen the red flags then, fluttering like storm warnings on the horizon, the subtle warning signs that lay hidden beneath the deceptively calm surface of Sarah's seemingly innocent request. But I, ever the eager-to-please husband, was blinded by love, by a deep-seated desire to fulfill her every wish, to be the supportive partner she always deserved. Emily. Even her name tasted different on my tongue, a blend of sweetness and a subtle, lingering bitterness. She had always been different, ethereal, artistic, almost otherworldly, whimsical, with a penchant for dramatic pronouncements and flights of fancy that often bordered on the bizarre. While Sarah, my Sarah, was practical, grounded, organized to a fault, a rock in the turbulent sea of life, Emily was a free spirit, a dandelion seed carried by the wind, drifting through life with a carefree abandon that both fascinated and unnerved me in equal measure. Sarah and Emily shared a bond that went deeper than mere sisterhood. They were confidants, allies, two halves of a whole. Fiercely loyal to one another, they had weathered countless storms together, their connection forged in the crucible of shared experiences and unspoken understanding. Their bond was a constant in my life, a comforting presence, a reliable anchor that I both admired and respected. I never imagined, not in my wildest dreams, that this very bond would become a source of such profound turmoil, a silent catalyst for the slow, agonizing unraveling of my marriage. Initially, my interactions with Emily were polite, perfunctory, kept carefully within the bounds of familial propriety. Casual conversations at obligatory family gatherings, the occasional, stilted phone call to discuss a shared interest, usually something artistic that Sarah had suggested. But Sarah, ever the well-meaning manipulator, subtly encouraged more frequent contact, gently pushing me to spend more time with her sister, to engage in deeper, more meaningful conversations, to become a trusted confidant, a shoulder to cry on, an ear to listen. I resisted at first, a primal instinct screaming a warning. A sense of unease, a vague premonition that I was treading on thin ice, venturing into dangerous territory where the rules were unclear and the consequences potentially devastating. But Sarah's persistence, masked as selfless concern, wore me down, eroding my resolve like waves against a cliff. I eventually relented, agreeing to have lunch with Emily, to listen patiently to her problems, mostly about her struggles as an artist, to offer advice, however inadequate. It started innocently enough, as all forbidden things often do. Lunches turned into impromptu coffee dates at that quirky little cafe Emily loved, the one with the mismatched chairs and the aroma of burnt sugar. Coffee dates gradually morphed into long meandering walks in the park, the leaves crunching under our feet as we discussed art, philosophy, and the meaning of life. Long walks insidiously morphed into evenings spent at Emily's bohemian apartment, listening to her play haunting melodies on her ancient, out-of-tune piano, discussing literature, dissecting films, and delving into the deepest recesses of our souls. Emily, beneath her eccentric exterior, was surprisingly intelligent, witty, and disarmingly insightful. She possessed a unique perspective on the world, a way of seeing things from an angle I had never considered, a perspective that I found both refreshing and profoundly challenging. I genuinely enjoyed our conversations, the intellectual sparring, the stimulating debates, the feeling of deep, almost inexplicable connection that I had never truly experienced with anyone else, not even Sarah, my wife of 15 years. The line began to blur, imperceptibly at first, then with alarming speed. Innocent friendship, carefully cultivated under the guise of familial duty, morphed into something more complex, something dangerous, something I felt powerless to control. The carefully constructed boundaries between brother-in-law and sister-in-law began to dissolve, like sugar in hot water, replaced by a growing sense of forbidden intimacy, a magnetic pull, a reckless attraction that threatened to consume us both in its fiery embrace. I desperately tried to deny it, to suppress the burgeoning feelings, to convince myself that I was simply being a good friend, a supportive brother-in-law, fulfilling my marital obligations. But the truth, stark and undeniable, was like a relentless tide, eroding my defenses and leaving me exposed and vulnerable. I was falling, head over heels, for Emily. And she, I increasingly suspected with a terrifying certainty, was reciprocating those feelings, falling just as hard, just as recklessly, for me. The guilt was a constant companion, a crushing weight on my chest that made it difficult to breathe, to sleep, to function. I was betraying Sarah, the woman I had vowed to love and cherish for the rest of my life, the woman who had entrusted me, with seemingly blind faith, with her sister's happiness and well-being. I was risking everything, my marriage, my family, my reputation, my sanity, for a forbidden desire, a fleeting moment of passion that threatened to irrevocably destroy everything I held dear. The podcast. Just the word itself sent shivers down my spine, a cold wave of dread washing over me. It was the final nail in the coffin, the definitive proof of my transgression, the irrefutable evidence of my betrayal. A clandestine recording of a seemingly innocent conversation between Emily and me, a private moment shared in the hushed intimacy of her apartment, surreptitiously recorded by an unknown party and then anonymously, and with malicious intent, sent to Sarah. The words, the inflections, the subtle nuances, the unmistakable intimacy that permeated our voices, the barely concealed affection that dripped from every syllable, it was all there, raw and exposed, laid bare for Sarah to hear, to dissect, to judge. There was no escaping the truth. No denying the depth of my betrayal. No mitigating the devastating consequences of my actions. I hadn't expected any of this. I hadn't expected to fall in love with my wife's sister. I hadn't expected my carefully constructed life to unravel so completely, so catastrophically, so irrevocably. I hadn't expected to become the villain in my own story, the architect of my own destruction. But here I was, facing the inevitable consequences of my actions, staring into the abyss of a future that was now irrevocably altered, grappling with the wreckage of a marriage shattered by a seemingly simple request, to be closer to my wife's sister. The podcast had revealed the truth, stripped bare all pretense, exposed the raw, ugly reality of my infidelity. Now, all that remained was to face the music, to accept the consequences, and to pray, with a desperate hope that bordered on delusion, that Sarah somehow, someday, would find it in her heart to forgive me. Even though I knew I could never forgive myself.